Okay, here's a thought. Could certain intense activities, the kind that really grab your attention, actually help you live longer?
Hmm. Interesting premise.
Right.
Not the usual stuff we hear about longevity, right?
Exactly. Not your daily vitamins. Today we're diving into this really fascinating idea, sparked by some listener curiosity, actually,
Yeah.
about how certain intense engagements might have life extending effects.
Right. And we're looking at a source today that basically argues our bodies are these amazing chemical factories.
Yeah, producing really powerful stuff naturally. And certain activities can, trigger their release in ways that might be surprisingly good for us.
What's really grabbing me from the start is this core idea from the source. We all know addictions can be bad, obviously.
Of course.
But it's suggesting there's this other type of intense involvement, this deep engagement that could be linked to a more vibrant and maybe even longer life.
It really reframes things, doesn't it? The idea that our behavior is deeply tied to this internal chemical reward system.
Totally. So the source we're digging into calls it drugs that prolong life, which sounds provocative, but
It is provocative. But the argument is, while the usual addictions wreck things, this other kind of intense focus may be something you work hard at.
like a skill.
Exactly, a skill. That could be super rewarding and maybe even boost longevity. It suggests these internal chemicals are like the puppet masters behind a lot of what we do.
And expanding on that, the source says our bodies are constantly making chemicals that affect how we feel, what
Yeah.
motivates us.
Right.
It specifically calls out endorphins, the mood boosters from exercise.
Uh-huh. The runner's high stuff.
Yeah, that. And adrenaline, the stress hormone, gives you that energy burst, sharpens focus.
Okay.
And dopamine, which is key for feeling pleasure and satisfaction when you, achieve a goal.
So it's not just that they exist. This source is basically saying all our behavior is guided by these internal structural drugs.
That's the term it uses, yeah.
Yeah.
And that we're sort of inherently addicted from birth in
Yeah.
a way.
Wow. Okay. And it uses heroin as an example, right, to show how powerful these internal chemicals are.
Exactly. It points out heroin, it's so addictive so fast because it's chemically almost identical to our own endorphins. Really highlights the potency of our natural system.
Okay, that makes sense. But it raises a question, doesn't it? If we have this built-in reward system, why aren't we all, base jumping? Why do people who aren't super active still crave intense experiences?
Good point. The source actually tackles that. It asks why people enjoy things like water parks, roller coasters.
Horror movies, action films,
Yeah, stuff like that, even if they lead pretty sedentary lives otherwise. Why the appeal?
and the answer is
The source suggests it's because even those seemingly passive things still stimulate the production of those internal feel-good chemicals. It's not just about physical effort.
okay, so it's the thrill, the suspense.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is the idea that, say, the pleasure you get from amazing classical music,
Yeah.
or that satisfaction when you finally crack a tough problem,
Yeah.
it might be tapping into the same basic neurochemical pathways, just, different doses.
Different doses based on what?
Based on how biologically important our brain thinks the activity is, and maybe how our individual brains have developed.
Okay, this is where it gets really counterintuitive, maybe. The source suggests that to really crank up the release of these good chemicals, we need to engage with our basic instincts, specifically self-preservation, that primal drive.
Precisely. The argument is that the best way to get a major hit of these rewarding chemicals is to interact with risk. And this is key in a specific way.
Not just any risk, though.
No, definitely not. The source is clear. Forget stupid stuff like Russian roulette. That's just chance, no skill involved.
Right.
Instead, it champions this concept of controlled dynamic risk.
Controlled dynamic risk. Okay, unpack that.
It leads straight to extreme sports as the perfect example.
Yeah.
Think climbing, surfing, skiing, steep slopes.
Things that are inherently dangerous.
Inherently dangerous, yes.
Uh-huh.
But the difference is, with training, skill, experience, you gain control.
And as your control increases.
So does the intensity of the reward. That high, that flood of internal chemicals gets stronger the more masterful you become within that risky environment.
The author talks about teaching windsurfing, right? I found that part really vivid.
Yeah, describing the sheer effort, the learning curve, even the pain involved sometimes.
To get to that heroin-like stage of enjoyment, as they put it.
Exactly. It's tongue-in-cheek, but it makes the point. Once you master it, that connection, that addiction to the feeling is incredibly powerful and probably long-term.
And they describe that state after a session, right? For experienced windsurfers.
Yeah, this almost meditative calm and focus after intense conditions. The source holds that up as like clear proof of the internal reward system firing on all cylinders because you successfully navigated that controlled risk.
I love the phrase adrenaline junkies who sold their souls to the god of wind.
Yeah. It captures that passion, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so we get how these activities trigger the endorphins, adrenaline, dopamine. But how does the source actually link this to living longer?
Okay, so the connection is made through the known benefits of these chemicals. Endorphins reduce stress, boost mood. Adrenaline, in bursts, can boost metabolism. Dopamine reinforces positive feelings, achievement.
Right.
So the argument is this cocktail leads to lower overall stress, a more positive outlook, and those things are linked to better quality of life and potentially a longer lifespan.
That makes sense intuitively. Feel good, less stressed, physically active. Seems like a good recipe. But then the source pivots slightly. It asks, why do we see so many smart people who aren't active, maybe are overweight, not living that healthy lifestyle?
Yeah, it flags that tension, doesn't it, between the immediate gratification of, say, eating something unhealthy
That instant reward.
versus the sort of distant, abstract benefit of being physically fit, especially later in life. The source suggests the immediate drivers for fitness aren't always that strong for everyone.
It's true. It mentions how, biologically, maybe the need for peak condition lessens after our reproductive years.
Right. And while looking good motivates some, that's often tied to external things like social pressure or finding a partner, not always an internal drive for health itself.
Which loops back perfectly to extreme sports.
Exactly. The source argues that needing to stay fit to keep doing the sport you love, that provides a way stronger, more immediate motivation for healthy habits.
Yeah, it's not, I should exercise. It's, I have to train so I can go climbing next weekend, or whatever it is.
Right. That passion becomes the engine. It drives the regular exercise, the focus on physical condition, much more effectively than just thinking about long-term health decades down the line.
So it's a powerful built-in
A
motivator.
very powerful one. And the benefits aren't just cardio, like regular gym workouts.
What else?
Well, think about it. Climbing, surfing, paragliding. They demand incredible coordination, balance, flexibility, core strength, often engaging the body in ways standard exercises don't.
Good point. More functional strength, maybe.
Yeah, and the source also highlights the mental side. The less routine nature, the stronger hormonal response compared to, say, jogging the same route every day.
Right.
It suggests this is better at fighting stress, maybe even depression. It frames the activity as a constant source of positive feelings, like a mental holiday.
A holiday you have to stay fit for.
Exactly. And these deep involvements, these dependencies, as the source calls them, add variety and purpose, goals, challenges, mastery.
Keeps things interesting.
Totally. Which contributes to high energy, motivation, enhancing quality of life, and again, potentially the duration.
But there's a flip side, isn't there? The source includes a warning.
Oh, absolutely. Crucial caveat. It stresses that excessive dependence carries real risks because these sports are inherently dangerous.
Balance is key.
Absolutely. Balance between the passion and overall health. The author even mentions losing friends who push too hard, which is a sobering reminder.
So that element of risk, while it drives the reward, needs careful management. Skill, training, judgment.
Vital. But the risk is always there. It's not something to be ignored.
Now, shifting gears slightly, the source also brings up social aspects, like perceived attractiveness.
Yeah, it observes that often women find men involved in these sports appealing.
And the reasons given are?
Well, partly the obvious display of fitness and resilience, sure, but also the association with adventure, travel, new experiences. It suggests a more dynamic life partner.
Someone who's not afraid to step outside the comfort zone.
Right, and it suggests people comfortable in extreme situations might be more reliable, decisive, adaptable in everyday life too, more confident.
That makes sense. And there was another connection, something about vitality.
Ah, yes, as a slightly more, let's say, provocative point. It links engagement in these sports to maintaining sexual vitality
Okay.
and presents that as another factor potentially contributing to quality and length of life. It even briefly mentions historical ideas about vitality and longevity.
Interesting tangent. So let's try and wrap this up. What's the core argument here, if you had to boil it down?
I think it's advocating for finding these strong, skill-based passions, things you have to work for, persevere at.
Not passive consumption.
Definitely not. These become integral parts of your life, things you actively do. And the payoff, the source argues, is a constant source of joy, better well-being, a kind of lifesaver.
Right. So the central thesis is really that this deep engagement, this addiction to something like an extreme sport, done skillfully, mindfully.
With respect for the risks.
Yeah, it can genuinely enhance your quality of life and maybe even extend it at any age.
So the big takeaway seems to be, actively seek challenges. Push your boundaries in a controlled way. Tap into those primal instincts skillfully.
And you might unlock a more powerful internal reward system.
Exactly. Creating this positive feedback loop, feeling more alive, more engaged, and maybe getting a health boost that contributes to a longer, richer life.
Makes you think, doesn't it? What activities in your life really make you feel fully present, totally engaged, that sense of accomplishment afterwards?
Could there be more going on there than just a hobby?
Yeah, and maybe our relentless pursuit of comfort and safety above all else. Could it be limiting us?
It's a provocative thought, right? What if embracing some calculated risk, some real challenge, isn't reckless, but actually key to a fuller human experience?
What kind of controlled dynamic risk might you consider exploring? Something to ponder.